Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we explore the inner game of writing and life and inspire you to start, finish and publish a best-selling book. I'm Mark Desvaux, and before we dive into this week's episode, I'd like to say thank you to our patrons of the week. These are some of our longest standing patrons, and we are so grateful for every week that you have supported this podcast. We'd like to say thank you to Neil Benyon, Rosemary Deuce, William Group, EJ Howard, and Georgia E. Thank you so much to all of you for supporting this podcast. And for anyone else who wonders, well, why do people do this? Well, you get hundreds of hours of extra bonus content, deep dives, extended editions where we go deeper and talk about stuff we probably shouldn't. But you get access to all of that and more. And you also get that really lovely, warm feeling of knowing that you're supporting this podcast and allowing us to show up each week and bring you inspiration and hopefully breakthroughs and hopefully get you to write your best book. And if you think that's worth like $10 a month, like a Starbucks coffee and a bit of a chocolate, which I think is pretty good value, then pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. And if you've been meaning to do it for many, many, many months and you've never done it, now is the time to do it, folks. Please do help us support all the people that we employ to bring this podcast to you each week. It's many, many hours of work go into this. Now, if you heard a previous episode, part 1 of the Hallmark habits of highly successful authors, if you enjoyed that, we have got another 5 Hallmark habits to share from you. So if this is your first time on the podcast or you didn't hear that episode, it's absolutely fine because these are not in any particular order. But what this is it's a review of the last 7.5 years of the nearly 500 plus authors that we have interviewed and done in-depth analysis around best-selling authors who have sold collectively 1 billion books. And I don't know if there's been an as in-depth review and study, if you like, on best-selling authors. I do think the Bestseller Experiment, I will put my neck out and say, I think this is the most in-depth study there's ever been. 7.5 years every week of looking and talking to the habits of authors. And what I've done is I pulled out what I believe to be the most common trends and habits that I've heard across all these authors that have sold 1 billion books. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, if you haven't listened to episode 500, the 6 life-changing reasons why we write, I really recommend you listen to it after this one, because what we really looked at in that episode is, the reasons why we write. But we also know there's lots of challenges that come up. And the way in which we overcome these challenges is using habits, like good habits. They can be, obviously we've all got bad habits as well, but developing good habits. And the more good habits you develop, it's very simple. The better author you become, and you increase your chances of your book being more successful and you becoming more successful an author. And for many of you, if you're striving to build a career, you've got this dream of wanting to be a full-time author and a, #1 New York Times bestseller or a Sunday Times bestseller, whatever it might be for you. If you develop some or all of these habits and you work on them, I guarantee you will get closer to that dream, if not accomplish it. And so these Hallmark habits are really things that I've seen across, not just random things that one person's mentioned. They're things I've heard time and time again, and things that I've recognized, not just in the authors I've worked with, but people that I've coached in all different walks of life, from like Olympic athletes to highly successful entrepreneurs to authors to Grammy award-winning musicians. I've seen this across all of those as well. So I'm drawing from, over 30 years of experience in coaching and working with incredibly successful people. And some of these I've also kind of used in my own life as well. So I'm talking from a personal perspective with some of these because I think it's important as well that this stuff is coming from personal experience as well. So let's move straight on and look at highly successful habit number 6. We worked on the last 5 on the previous episode, but now we're on to number 6. And what is number 6? Well, number 6 is successful authors write, then edit. Now, this is a really important practice that we've heard time and time again. It's also something which many, many authors, especially when they're starting out, and even been writing for years, to be honest, I've heard this from people who've been working for 10, 20 years on books. Most authors tend to edit as they go. And it's really hard not to, because we're kind of programmed to correct our mistakes. Like if I'm speaking on the podcast and I mess up, I might clap and stop the recording, go back and re-record it. And I've just got to the point now where I just let it go. What you hear is what you get. I've been doing this too long. The first funny story, the first 20 episodes we ever did of the Bestseller Experiment was before I hired a team, a production team to work with me, because I literally was editing every single episode, recording it with Mark, editing, and it was taking me hours, because you'd go through and I'd be like, oh, there's an and an and a throat clear and a lip smack, they call them, all these wonderful noises you're now going to hear me doing. But the point is I was going through and I was snipping every one of those out to make it sound really professional and the very best high quality, high fidelity audio possible. And then I just relaxed and thought, you know what? It's better just to be natural. You watch BBC News and there are people on there umming and erring, and there's all these different things. It doesn't have to be perfect. But when we first start out, we want it to be perfect. And I think what happens is early on in our writing career, we develop this bad habit, where we edit as we go. And the problem with editing as we go is we're trying to do two things at once. Writing and editing are two very, very different tasks. One, you want to be free flowing. You want to be like, you go for a run. You want to keep running forward. Editing is where you stop and you analyze and you look at and you tweak and you change. Now imagine, this is how ridiculous editing as you go is. Imagine going for a run and every 5 to 6 steps you stopped and you looked down at a stone on the ground and you turned it and you looked around at the stone, you put it back, and then you ran on again. And then in half a minute, you stop again and you find another stone, you pick it up and you have a look at it. Like, how ridiculous would that be? How would you ever get into the routine and rhythm or the flow of running? You wouldn't. And for anyone who's ever run, of which hopefully most of us have done in our lives, you know that there is this moment when you kind of hit your stride. I always find when I go for a run, the first minute or two is absolutely awful. It's like, especially if you haven't been running for a while, like your lungs are hurting, your legs are going, what are you doing? It's like, I don't want to do this. I want to be sitting watching Netflix. But the point is that when you start running, it's all a bit cobweb-like and it's a bit stiff. Even if you're a seasoned runner, if you've had a long run, 2-3 days before and your legs are stiff, it takes a bit of time to get in. So it takes a bit of time getting into the flow. But when you hit your stride, suddenly you're like, oh, actually, I got through that initial pain. I've got my second win now. I can keep going. And then once you really get into it, you can just keep going without even thinking about it. But imagine if every 5 steps you were stopping and picking up a stone. It's not going to happen. So if you want to get your run done and you want to get your book finished, you want to get your first draft written, edit once you've written your first draft. Even, and this is a mind-blowing thing to me, even if you've made ridiculous typos, and you can tell that the word's barely legible, it doesn't matter. As long as you can work it out in the edit, then do it then. And if you can't work it out, then write something different in the edit because it wasn't meant to be in the first place. So one massive tip, which I heard from a lot of authors, is turn off if you're using Word or Google Documents or Scrivener or anything that highlights grammatical or spelling mistakes, turn off the underlying red line. Turn it off, because that's the equivalent of having your phone turned on and binging you every time you get every time you get a notification. If you're trying to write and your phone keeps binging, you're like, oh, I'll just go and have a look at that. That's the same as picking up stones when you're running. So turn off the visual. Don't reread what you've written. Or in a recent brilliant masterclass on dictation that Ian Sainsbury gave in the Bestseller Academy, he pointed out something which I didn't even think of. He said, with dictation, you can't edit as you go. You just have to keep talking. And so if you're struggling with editing all the time as you're trying to write your first draft, maybe try dictating. Dictation, it's messy. Of course it's messy. and it's hard to get into. But once you get into it, a bit like running, once you find your stride, you'll get that first draft done in no time. So I want to encourage you to think about that. It's very hard if you do it because you've got to first undo it. It's a bit like the practice is hard to break. The bad practice of editing is you write, it's bad to break. So you've got to start to first reverse engineer that. And if you want some tips on how to do that, I focus quite a bit on that in the academy as well, because it's a very common thing. The other thing to think about on that note, actually, is that there's a thing called batching within efficiencies and productivity within, day-to-day work. They always say if you've got like 4 phone calls to make, 10 emails to respond to or send, and paper to write, batch the similar tasks together. So put aside time to write your emails in one go. Then put aside time to make your phone calls in one go. And what happens is the more of the same task that we batch together, the more we get into it. A bit like I said with running earlier, the more we kind of get into the flow of it. When we're switching tasks, different types of tasks, if we were going from making a phone call to sending an email to writing the first paragraph of the paper or the chapter that we're writing, and then back to sending another email, and then checking our phone, and then going on Facebook, and then checking out that YouTube video that suddenly popped up. We're just flip-flopping. And you know what? In this day and age, we have been trained by phones and social media to become that monkey mind, to be jumping around doing, and we're all struggling with it. I struggle with it all the time. I've had to completely rewrite the way in which I set up my working day to keep me focused. Because I have to practice what I preach. And I work with a lot of people when I'm coaching them, and this is one of the biggest challenges. We have been trained to develop the incredibly bad habit of task switching, and batching is best, right? Batch things together. But we first have to resist the temptation, and now the very deeply ingrained habit that most of us have, which is being trained to respond to our phone, trained to be responding to our social media, trained to be responding to all the external things that the world is trying to make us pay attention to, because we're part of an attention economy, and companies make money out of us when they keep our attention. That's simply all it is. They are profiting from our attention. And, spending 2 hours on Facebook is not something you're going to look back on your deathbed and go, oh, I'm so glad I spent 2 hours a day on Facebook. But you will look back on your deathbed and say, I'm so glad that I spent 2 hours writing that book every day. And I'm now leaving all of these books that I've written to my family and to my fans out into the world. And there's a bit of me staying here before I go, right? Or once I've gone. We've got to realize that there is a Lord of the Rings scale battle going on. That, I can't remember which one it was. I can't remember which one of the three. But, those massive battle scenes where you've got Gandalf coming over, the White Wizard coming over the hill, and then you've got all these orcs lined up, and it all just clashed together. That's what's going on in our minds and in our day-to-day with social media, with phones. And I'm not saying, by the way, that social media is a bad thing. Just like a knife can be used as a weapon, or it can be used as a tool to carve a spoon to eat with. Social media is just social media. And there's some brilliant stuff about social media. There's loads of great things about social media. But the problem is that it's how it's being used by some people, right? Companies that need our attention. If it's about just getting our attention, then they are stealing your books, folks. That's the only way I can say it. They're stealing your catalogue of books that you otherwise could have written in the last 10 years or can be writing over the next 10 years of your life. You're literally trading in the time you're spending looking at, entertaining and sometimes pointless stuff. I don't know where this all come from. I'm getting a bit grumpy on the old social media, but I've noticed particularly recently with the reels and the shorts, there's some brilliant videos. And yeah, they're serving you stuff that you love. But I don't know about you, but whenever I get to the end of being in one of those binge sessions where you've sat down for like half an hour and you just started watching one 30-second or 10-second video after the other, you feel a bit gross afterwards. it's not just me, is it? You kind of come away from it feeling a little bit kind of icky and like, or you feel crap about life. That's the other thing I noticed. A lot of people have said to me, I watch those videos and I see this life out there that seems to be amazingly fun and isn't in any way relevant or related to what I'm experiencing in life. And I feel like I'm missing out. I feel like my life's a failure. I feel like I'm a failure. Like all these people, like with their nice cars and, you know, these hotels and these holidays they're going on. It leaves you, and there's research that leaves you feeling really low and even depressed. I mean, we know this in teens, massive depression. Teenage girls, since COVID, and I heard this on another podcast, they said that the rate of depressions have gone up from 20 to 30% of all teenage girls, which is insane. Lots of reasons why. But anyway, that was me on a little bugbear. The reason, though, why I've said all that is it's the number one reason why people aren't writing books. It's the biggest distraction. And so when we talk about writing and not editing, it's about not being distracted. But before we can even get to that phase, you have to really start working on, we all have to start working on, including myself, how not to be distracted by the outside world of stuff that isn't really what you want to be focusing on, which won't write your book for you. It might give you some interesting research for sure, but there's only so much of that you can do. So let's start working on breaking the habit of distraction in our day-to-day lives on our phones and social media. Because as we start to build that muscle, we'll find that when we start writing, we'll be able to break the distraction of editing as we go. Number 7 in the hallmark habits of highly successful authors is successful authors write what they know. Now, if you're a long-term fan and listener of this podcast, you'll know that this is something that's come up time and time again. But I really feel that this is so important because when you write what you know, you write with authenticity. You write differently. You write from a depth of knowing, and not just knowing it, but feeling it. It's the power of real experience. If you've experienced it, if you've felt it, you can describe what it feels like authentically. Otherwise, you're just describing something as you imagine it. And that's a very different thing. I mean, obviously, we have to be incredibly imaginative when we're writing books. But the root of your book, the core of your book, where's that coming from? Is it coming from direct personal experiences you've had? And I often use this example to really clarify this, and that is that if anyone's gone through parenting, do you remember those pre-parenting groups that everyone went to, your prenatal class? They'll say, oh yeah, this will happen and you won't believe it. And you can hear all that, but until you experience it, you just do not know. You have no idea what is going to happen and how it is going to fundamentally change your life. And, you know, again, another really powerful one, which I've got personal experience, and many of you will as well, is like losing someone you love. People can try to explain what that feels like and how it affects your life and how it changes your life forever. But until you experience it, you'll never know. So write what you know. If you're writing a novel about anything, it doesn't matter what it is, stop and ask yourself, how can I weave some of my personal experiences into this so that I can write about the feeling with authenticity? Because I believe that when you write about real experiences, you weave those in, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. You know, tell your own stories in non-fiction books for sure. But when you tell and write your own experiences, the reader reads and feels things on a different level. There's a secret sauce, isn't there, about how you connect emotionally to the listener and the reader. And when you connect emotionally, something's different. And you know it from every book that you've ever read, where there's something about that book that's just touched you emotionally. It's moved you. Emotion, moving you, moving your readers. Just imagine how much more powerful it is. So, if you're writing a science fiction, you're writing about, extraterrestrial planets, you might be saying, well, Mark, it's all imagined. I'm making it all up. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how the characters in your story draw from your own personal experiences, emotional experiences and journeys. And I think a lot of us do this naturally without thinking about it, but doing it with intention is very powerful, because what you can then do is you can look at something that happened in your life and stop for a minute whilst you're writing and say, what did that feel like? How do I describe that feeling, that emotion? The show don't tell. That's what it is. But if you stop and you draw from that and then you keep writing, your story will be richer for it. So, write what you know. Okay, highly successful habit number 8 is successful authors have deadlines. I cannot begin to tell you the amount of authors and people that I've coached over the years who've come to me and said, I want to write a book, or I want to record an album. And I say, great. I say, how's it going? Oh, well, I've got a few things on the go. Okay. And when do you want to have it finished by? And then there's silence. And it blows me away. The majority, I would say 95% of the people I've coached haven't got an answer to that question. And if you're listening to this right now and you're going, yeah, I haven't thought about that actually, I don't know when I want to finish my book. That is the number one reason why you can't finish your book, because there isn't a defined finish line. I've noticed with all the successful authors that we've interviewed on the podcast, everyone has eventually worked around to this idea of setting a deadline. It doesn't mean meeting deadlines. I'm not talking about hitting a deadline every single time. The most important thing is setting that deadline, so at least you've got a stake in the ground. And I say it's okay to move that stake, but unless you have a stake in the ground, you haven't got anything to aim for. So the great thing, and there's no coincidence here, many successful authors who've sold millions of copies of books, the vast majority of them are signed to publishing companies. And I believe one of the most important things that a publishing contract can give you is a deadline. I think that's partly why people sign contracts, because they know that someone outside of themselves is going to create an accountability for them, because generally we're really bad at creating accountabilities for ourselves. And why is that? Well, I once gave a talk about this idea of internal versus external accountabilities. And an internal accountability is one when you say, oh, I'm going to get this book done by the summer. Well, that's not a deadline. The summer's a very long period of time. Like, nail it down. When we're in the Bestseller Academy, one of the first things that we ask people to do is set their dream declaration. And part of that dream declaration is not just putting down the date, but also the time that they're going to finish that book. It's not January, that's 31 days. That's, what is it, 31st of January or the 1st of January? You've got to really focus on making it really specific. And the thing about external accountability is that publishing contracts can be broken if you don't deliver. If it's part of the contract, if you don't deliver your book within a certain date, the publishing house is within their rights to turn around to you and say, you didn't deliver your book, give us back your advance, and we're dropping you as an author, right? An internal accountability, if you're self-publishing, is I'm going to try and get my book out in the summer. And even if you're really good at setting goals and you say by the 31st of May, if you don't hit that deadline, what's the worst that happens? With an internal accountability, the worst that happens is you just beat yourself up. Oh, I missed the deadline. Oh, I suck. Okay. Okay, maybe I'll make it end of next month. And then you just rinse and repeat that. There's no external accountability. You only beat yourself up and make yourself, actually feel less like you're going to accomplish anything anyway, which isn't good. But there's no consequence because you can even keep that internal deadline to yourself. You don't even have to tell anyone. So nobody ultimately says, oh, did you finish your book? Did you write your book? But the external accountability is what gets things finished. So the big challenge is if you're not signed, if you don't have a publishing deal, how do you get that external accountability? And this is one of the things I recognized that most people were lacking, which is it's something we've baked into the academy. We, in essence, kind of act as that avatar, that make-believe publisher by asking you to set your deadlines and then holding you accountable to it. And it works. In fact, it works so well that most people in the academy finish their books before their deadline, which is incredible. That's something I've never really seen before. Because people get so inspired and enthused by writing that they race towards that finish line. Just because the fact they have a finish line, it's so lovely to know where you're going and where it ends. So think about accountabilities. If you don't have them, you're probably not finishing your book, right? And there's very few people, I think, in this planet who are so self-motivated that they can set their own internal accountability and reach it. Now, if that's one of you, then you are in an incredibly elite group of people because most people out in the world, and I speak as the coach, for many years, most people are the very opposite of that. So brilliant. If it's working for you, then tell other people how you do it. Write into me, actually, and let me know some of the tricks that you've used to help you get to that finish line if you're not signed to a publisher. What's been your secret sauce? Okay, number 9. In the hallmark habits of highly successful authors is successful authors start what they finish. Now, this is obviously linked to the last habit about successful authors having deadlines, but successful authors start what they finish is all about the most important thing of all, which is getting to the 6 most amazing letters you can ever write as an author, which is THE space END, the end. Now, I'm not talking about having to go back and look at all the things you started. I have a ton of unfinished books, so I'm speaking from experience here as well, folks. But I'm talking about developing the muscle, developing the habit of practicing finishing. Practicing finishing. Where does that start? Well, it starts with the 200-word challenge, because the 200-word challenge is a daily practice of finishing 200 words. It's no coincidence that people that get into doing the 200-word challenge actually do finish their books, because what they're doing is they're practicing finishing 200 words every single day, and that builds your muscles day by day, week by week, and month by month. But what we're aiming to get here as authors is we're aiming to get the habit of finishing. We want finishing to become a habit, because for most people, not finishing is the habit. For most people, putting their current work in progress away for a little bit because they're stuck on it becomes a habit. Starting something new becomes a habit. All these things work against you ever finishing anything. And I know I haven't got stats on it, but I do believe that the vast majority of writers have started more things than they've finished. And when you look at authors who have written multiple books, I think of Gareth Powell in the Academy, the British sci-fi author, who's won best novel, sci-fi novel twice. The same awards that people like Arthur C. Clarke have won. He's up to book 20 now. I look at Shannon Mayer, who would pop out 12 books a year. It's just insane. Barbara Cartland, I don't know how many books she ended up publishing. It was definitely in the hundreds. Most of them I think a lot of them were dictated. Agatha Christie, Mark Victor Hansen, Guinness Book of Records. He's been interviewed on the podcast, Chicken Soup for the Soul co-founder. Guinness Book of Records for the most books ever published. I think it's about 380 so far, and he's still writing more. These people have the habit of finishing, whereas most other people have the habit of not finishing. We're great with the habit of starting something, but we're not great with the habit of finishing. And I've always said this, but words are our currency as authors. And unless we get to that finish line, we have nothing to show, literally nothing to show for what we've done, for all the hard work we put in. There is a big debate over whether you should stop writing something that you're not feeling, that one that you're halfway through, that you're stuck on. I think after 7.5 years doing this podcast, I would put my neck out and say, start what you finished, even if you think it's the biggest pile of rubbish you've ever written. Get to the end of the draft one, because as we said in the previous episode, every author thinks what their current work in progress at some point is the worst thing they've ever written. So I'm gonna put my neck out and say, if you're going to write something, commit to finishing it. And honestly, here's a little tip. If you're really not enjoying a book that you're working on right now, maybe you're 30,000 words into a 70,000 word story. Maybe you're, 50,000 words into 150,000 word fantasy, epic fantasy. Stop writing that book as a full-length novel today if you're really stuck on it, and finish it as a short story. Just finish it as a short story just to get to the end of the story. You don't have to write the 150,000 words to get to the end. But here's something incredible that might happen. You might take all the pressure off yourself of having to go through the slog of whatever it is you're stuck on or what you're not feeling. And you might finish that story, half-written novel, full-length novel, and then half-written short story in the second part of it. And realize that you've discovered and become re-enthused by what you've written, and you can now see the light at the end of the tunnel. Then maybe you can write out the rest of that book. And I want someone today listening to this to write to me in maybe a year from now and say, I was listening to this episode, I had that book you talked about, it was in the drawer, it was on the computer gathering digital dust, and I got it back out and I finished the book as a short story in a day. I got so enthused by it. I wanted to finish it as a novel, and then I wrote it, and then I published it, and then it became a bestseller. I want to hear that story, because I'm absolutely know in my heart that will happen to someone listening to this right now, and it could be you. So try that out. I'm going to call it the second half short story technique. Okay, so if you want to talk to people about it, call it that. The second half short story technique. And we can give it an official name right here, right now, and you can try it out and see if it works. So folks, we've come to the last of the hallmark habits of highly successful authors for this episode, because there's more than just 10. We're up to, they've done 5 before. This is the next 5, but I've got more of these. And this is simply that successful writers develop successful writing habits. I said earlier that words are your currency as a writer. And the more words you have, the richer you are as a writer. If currency is in your bank account, if the words you write, you put in your word bank, you're a richer writer for every word that you contribute to that. And the most successful writing habit of all, bar none, that we have heard over and over and over again on this podcast is simply WED, W-E-D, which stands for write every day. When we don't use our muscles, they atrophy, they waste away. And this writing habit of writing every day is the reverse of that. It builds the muscle. Like I remember Ben Aronovich saying, if he didn't write for a week or two, he'd come back and the characters in his book would have been bored and walked off, left the page, right? Which is the best analogy, right? When you think about it. If you're not going to show up for your characters, why should they hang around for you? So we've got to work on this. And again, I'm not here to tell you or say you should be doing every single day. We're human beings. It's very hard. In fact, I know of a handful of people in the 7.5 years of doing this podcast that actually have a completely consistent daily writing habit where they would, it would be like losing a lottery ticket if they didn't bank their words for a day and break that streak. But for the rest of us, for the vast majority of us, it's something just we work on. We get stronger at it. Sometimes we get a little bit weaker at it, but we keep working on it. If your intention is to strive to become the very best author, writer, best-selling author, best book you want to write, whatever it might be, we have to make this our number one focus. Can I write today? How can I write today? What can I write today? How can I find time to write today? But we have to write every day. And not only does that get us into the momentum of writing, but as writers, we improve. We go deeper and deeper and deeper into our work with the more consistency of writing. So I want to leave you with that thought today, because if there's one thing I've learned from this podcast, I've learned a lot actually from this podcast, but if there's one massive thing I've learned from this podcast, it's simply that: write every day. So after you've listened to this podcast, I want you to stop wherever you are. If you're driving somewhere, waiting for the kids, cooking dinner, listening to this in bed and about to get up, or even about to go to sleep, in the garden weeding. What else could you be doing? I'm trying to imagine. Laundry, folding laundry and ironing apparently is a popular one podcast. So if you're doing that, good job on you. But as soon as you finished it, write 200 words about anything. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't have to be your story. Just write something, just to do it and see how it feels. And that would make me very happy as well, to know that you've done that, because words change the world. And that's why we show up to write. So on the 13th of May, I am launching the live 200-word challenge. It's a 5-day 200-word challenge where I will be going live online every single day and giving you live coaching and delving really deeply into why the 200-word challenge is working and why it's so successful. I'll delve a little bit into the magic of what makes it work, and also go a bit into the psychology of why it works as well. Because when I designed this challenge, I've been doing a lot of research into the world of habits, which, as we all know, is like a really big topic right now. So do join me, 200wordchallenge.com. Write this date in your diary, the 13th of May, going all the way through to the Friday, the 17th of May. And this is going to be one of the most exciting things we've done on the podcast. I cannot wait to do this. And there'll be so much more I'll be sharing with you. If you think about it over the week, it'll be a good couple of hours worth of coaching that you'll be getting. And it's a free challenge. This is free to absolutely everyone. It's sponsored by the Bestseller Academy. So come and join us and find out more about how you can create a writing habit for a lifetime, which is the absolute ultimate goal. So do join me, 200wordchallenge.com. So folks, that comes to the end of this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, another biggie. Whoa, where are we going with this? We're going really deep. I like it. It's different. And I hope you find it inspiring. I really do. But if you've enjoyed the music that you heard on the podcast, music playing in the background, the Bestseller Experiment theme, please do check out my music project, Urban Myth Club, on Spotify, iTunes, and all good digital record stores. Subscribe to Urban Myth Club if you'd like to get all the music that we create. And you can watch a video of today's episode as well on YouTube at Bestseller Experiment. Join us on socials: Facebook, Bestseller Experiment, X, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Pinterest are all at Bestseller XP. And if you've enjoyed today and you want to check out today's show notes, we create them every single episode. If you pop along to the website, the bestsellerexperiment.com website, click on this episode, you'll find tons of really useful links. And there's also what's there, a newsletter you can sign up to. Click on newsletter to get weekly updates, new episodes, and exclusives. And you can also drop me a note by clicking on the contact button. Now, I really hope today, folks, you'll reference some of these habits that you'll pick up over the next few weeks, start working on, and write to me. Let me know how they're going, because I really do appreciate hearing your successes. It really keeps me going, keeps me filled up. So do reach out and let me know how this has helped today. And finally, as I said many times in this episode, if you want to get that book written, I do believe the secret is 200 words a day. So go and do the 200wordchallenge.com for free. Join thousands of other people building their daily writing habit. Add to the 40 million plus words that people have already banked writing on the challenge. And see if you can write consecutively. My challenge to you is to see if you can write consecutively for the next 5 days in a row. So folks, have a fantastic writing week. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with me today when you should have been writing. So I really appreciate that. But go right now. And until next time, folks, this is a goodbye from me, Mark Desvaux, aka Bookmark. Goodbye. What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy.